It is the 2nd of the 11th, 2025. The time is 7 minutes past 8, and that means, as always, one thing, that there are a multitude of F1-centric threads at which we need to pull. In the first instance, we'll talk about Charles Leclerc. Good news on the engagement front, Mr. and Mrs Leclerc. So too, we'll talk about Ollie Bearman, who chose to talk about Maximilian Verstappen. GOAT. We'll talk about Ted Kravitz getting destroyed on social medias for some of his comments on the Road to Success podcast, talking about a question that he wanted to pitch but didn't at Oscar Piastri. It's techier than techie things, particularly in the weird and wacky world that is the F that wonks. In the first instance, we've got to talk about Ollie Bearman, who's come out and said, you know what, Max Verstappen might be the greatest of them. I see him as the benchmark, the reference point. Therefore, at the Mexican Grand Prix, when he was bearing down upon my gearbox, I was filled with nothing but fear. Welcome, Ollie Bearman. We've been expecting you, sir, along with the other F1 muggles in Damon Hill, Johnny Herbert, Nico Rosberg, all and sundry, who now realise that Maximilian Verstappen is breathing rarefied air by dint of his performances this year at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in quali. So too at the British Grand Prix in quali, the pole, if you'll recall. Similar thing over at Suzuka, had no right to win himself a race. But again, we're talking now about a cacophony, no, an orgy of evidence that's presenting, all pointing to Maximilian Verstappen being at the very least in the conversation for one of the GOATs. And so too, you hear that Kelly PK says that her young one, the new addition to the family, Maximilian Verstappen's firstborn, was a rainbow baby. Oh, the humanity. You realise that Max Verstappen was dealing with tragedy all the while in 2024 when he had a fire-breathing dragon in Lando Norris in an ostensibly quicker car breathing down his neck. Can you say resilience, God-tier levels of because I can? Oh, and by the way, Charles Leclerc, good news. Mr. and Mrs Leclerc, girls around the world have just had that. You can hear their hearts breaking in real time. This is why I think this is good for Charles Leclerc, though. Stability. You know already that Scuderia Ferrari have been chaos, nothing if not unstable. You know already that the SF25 is chaos, that the Sir Lewis Hamilton symbiosis of brand Hamilton with brand Scuderia Ferrari is absolutely chaos. Lewis looking to institute for some changes because he knows already what good looks like, what championship level worth of good looks like, looking to institute for change, sending memos here and there. But the problem, chat, is this. Why would Charles Leclerc extend Scuderia Ferrari more grace than he has already? If he's in his prime, now 28 years old, just on the cusp of getting married, he needs their full stability in his life. And I don't think Scuderia Ferrari, the red car with the yellow badge and the black prancing horse, can offer him that if past is prologue. Frederick Vasseur, that's a marriage of convenience. John Elkann doesn't want him. He wants Christian Horner as the team principal. He sees him as the dude that potentially could get Ferrari, Stellantis, Fiat to the next level. Sir John Perry, you're an absolute legend, sir. So why then would Charles Leclerc go against his team, who are now looking for another deal with, I don't know, Aston Martin or Mercedes or the Bulls that are red? Why then would Charles Leclerc choose to swim against their grain, to go upstream, to decide that he wants to win a championship with Scuderia Ferrari more than he wants to win a championship? Rest assured, next year will be chaos. All and sundry, all of the top tier drivers being Max, Charles and George will pervade their circumstance and make their decision according to which of those teams, mention no names, Mercedes, deliver the best car, the market leading one, the purple sector one. Charles Leclerc will not hang around at Scuderia Ferrari, particularly if they keep making these mistakes and or errors of the unforced variety. How much more can they make? The rigidity of the car, the back lacking. Now, they said that they fixed it. Yeah, they've turned the corner. Colour me naive. I don't believe them. I will not be holding my breath, and I will reserve judgment. They say that they've dialed out some of the sensitivity that the car suffered from earlier in the year. Well, I've yet to see it, chat. I've forgive me for being a skeptic in perpetuity as far as Maranello and Fiorano are concerned. Lest we forget the last time that they won silverware, 2008 in the Constructors' Drivers 2007 at the hands of Kimi Raikkonen, who even then managed to sneak in the back door whilst Alonso and Hamilton were busy taking chunks out of each other's points? Or are you telling me that Charles Leclerc wants to be attached to that legacy, that dynasty of underperformance? I think not, as if he's not one of the best drivers on the grid, about to get married. And again, this is time to recalibrate now for Charles Leclerc. It should be if it's not. And that's why I reckon if you're a betting person, if you were a betting degenerate, I think Charles Leclerc is no longer a red car with a yellow badge and black prancing course driver as soon as 2027. It's going to get techie and techie things. Oh, and by the way, I need to have a conversation about Ted Kravitz. The context is this, chat. Ted Kravitz is something of I want to call him a pioneer, but I also want to say that he's a controversial character to give the context its full colour and balance. Ted Kravitz, I've always admired him as a bit of a pit lane correspondent. He cuts through, he gives you the information that you need and might not have known about, and I admire that. He's a Sky Sports F1 nevertheless, and that will come with its own problems. There are accusations already of British bias, and some say that Ted Kravitz is in a patch on, let's say, I don't know, a Murray Walker, though they do different jobs, or a Peter D. Windsor, as far as the level and texture of knowledge that he's able to convey across the airwaves. That being said, I've always been a big fan of Ted Kravitz until I reached out to him and tried to get him onto the show and got aired, ladies and gentlemen. And then to see him on a podcast, I was like, okay, cool, let's see how this goes for him. On that podcast, he tells a story on the back of the Baku Grand Prix where Oscar Piastri struggled, yeeted it into the barrier, mistake after mistake, as near as makes no difference. You'll recall Oscar Piastri dropped the ball at the start, bloody full started, didn't he? And then would have incurred a 5-second grid penalty, but for him having DNF'd it on the ensuing set of corners. Oscar Piastri had a nightmare, whereas, as near as makes no difference, all season long season to date, prior to Baku, he'd been god tier, been leading the championship. He was bossing Lando Norris. Mr. Metronomic, reminded me of Max Verstappen over at Miami Grand Prix. You saw the way he teed up Max, checkmate in 4 moves. He was playing a different game to the rest of them. Of course, he had the dominant MCL 3.9, but yet and still in his 3rd season, to say that chap, the Aussie, was not worthy of praise is to be disingenuous and or an abbot of F1 reason, for he was really bloody good, uncannily good. Some would say that he reminded me of Maximilian Verstappen in his ability to place the car in a way that was as near as makes no difference. Forensic, doesn't hesitate to pull the trigger and try, make and stick an overtaking manoeuvre. Please see Lewis Hamilton earlier on in the season, round the outside to Trailer Park Girls go round the outside. Same thing at Baku last year, 2024, around Charles Leclerc. Chaos scenes, so too. Similar thing on Lando Norris, the Italian Grand Prix chicane number 2. I say all of this to say this. Oscar Piastri has been god tier. So how very dare Ted Kravitz then attempt even to disrespect this dude? Let me play you the clip and then we'll talk about it. Ted Kravitz went on the Road to Success podcast and said the following about his line of questioning to OJP.
Or Oscar Piastri coming off crashing in Baku. You know, I thought he doesn't really want to answer questions about why did you crash? Why did you crash in qualifying? Why did you crash in the race? You know, was that a consequence of the jump start? So I put myself in his head. And with Lando, I said, Monaco, you did it. And a little smile went on his lips. And he was like, yeah, I did it. And then I knew I was away and I could ask, you know, about the strategy or whatever the boring question was next or whatever. And with Oscar, I was going to do, I had this idea last weekend after the Baku Nightmare to do, you know, when you ring up some people and they say, can I just take you through some security questions, sir? What's your middle name? Yeah. What was the name of your first pet?
What's your mother's name?
What's your maiden name? Exactly. Not hard for me because Kravitz is my mother's maiden name. I use her name. If anyone wants to try and get through my security questions, but I thought I had this idea to Oscar Piastri. It was like, okay, let's find out if we're talking to the real Oscar Piastri here. So let's ask him the security questions. And once we've established, see where I'm going with this, maybe not, maybe it's a terrible idea, which is why I didn't use it in the end. It was like, okay, I was going to start. Oh, sorry, Mr. Piastri, can I just take you through some security questions? Can I have your mother's maiden name? Okay, good. Can I have the name of your first pet? Fluffles. Okay, great. Okay, now I'm dealing with the real, I'm satisfied I'm dealing with the real Oscar Piastri. Who was driving that car last week? And I was going to see what he thought. And then I thought, to go back to what you're saying, maybe I'll put myself in his head. And maybe he might think, oh, yes, all very clever, Kravitz, but to you, that's a bit of a stupid, bit rude. It was me driving and I just made a mistake, all right? So I decided not to do that. So that's the way you try and mitigate any kind of sensitivities by seeing it from their point of view.
Ted Kravitz, behave yourself, mate. There's so much in there at which we need to unpick. English bias. Was that British bias manifest potentially? You'll never know unless you peel back Ted Kravitz's brain and get in there. What I will say that it's tone deaf. Ultimately, though, the outcome was this. He thought about it and didn't ask the question. So then why, Ted Kravitz, are you retelling the anecdote on a bloody podcast? If you didn't ask the question, then don't talk about it, sir, because the internet and the F1 community is such that it will become a conversation and you will get destroyed for it in the face of social media, in the court of public opinion, as if you had ask the question. And this just makes no sense. I don't know why Ted Kravitz would go on a podcast and talk about it as if all of the F1 community and watching fans globally will not see it. Now, I understand why Ted Kravitz wanted to do that. He wanted to foster a little bit of rapport like he did with Lando Norris at Monaco, where he said to Lando, well, you've done it, whatever. He was trying his best, right? But the problem with Ted Kravitz has been this. He's never been that guy. He's never going to be a Howard Cosell or an Ariel Helwani as far as F1's concerned, because he doesn't have that personality, that personable trait. He just doesn't have that in his toolbox. So I don't know why he's trying. Actually, scrap that. I do know why he's trying, because F1 is going into its attitude era. You heard Stefano Domenicali's minion Liam Parker yesterday, again, Chief Communications Officer and Head of Corporate Relations, say that this is no longer a sport, that what we're dealing with here is content in essence. When you boil it down to brass tacks, it is no more difficult, no more complicated or simple than that. What they're competing for now is the attention dollars of the 18 to 35-year-old demographic who can be seen frequenting Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram. That's what Formula One is competing with. And under that aegis, of course, you need a pit lane reporter who's going to ask some techier than techie questions to a dude like Oscar Piastri on a weekend like Azerbaijan. Now, as grizzled F1 vets, do we like it? Absolutely flipping not. Oscar Piastri had just come off the most difficult race weekend of his career, and you want to start getting charismatic Ted Kravitz all of a sudden, getting techie with the questions. Well, it would feel like there is a better time and a better place for that, Ted. But I understand, chat, Dynamite, Miami, because we can't have it both ways. If we want it to be content and we have these conversations and interviews under the umbrella heading of virality, if that's the goal, then you need to have yourself a Ted Kravitz asking some techie questions. You need to have Brundle getting awkward with a Megan Thee Stallion on the bloody grid walk, because that's what we're aiming for now, chat. Remember, Liam Parker said, we are not a sport, full stop. New paragraph. Oscar going to prove British bias journos so wrong. It would be beautiful to see. Dynamite. Listen, I don't doubt that Oscar Piastri is capable. I do not doubt for a second. We spoke about it earlier. No, that would come off even worse when Lando was roasting Hamilton and Leclerc for I know it's banter, isn't it? But I think, Miami, that's the era. It's Drive to Survive era. This is what it is now. And I don't hate Ted Kravitz for trying to lean into that necessary. The only thing I hate, Ted, either ask the question or don't talk about it, chap. This isn't Fermat's last theorem for which we are trying to solve. This is counting its basics. Either ask the question and bear the brunt of whatever pushbacks that you've got coming down the pipe, or don't ask it and don't talk about it at all, that he's on there talking about it. The repercussions are as if he did ask the bloody question. It gets very, very techie. I hope he gets his form back to win this year if Max doesn't says dynamite. I hope so. What did I miss? Ted saying that. Safat, he's always a loose cannon. To Safat's point, what did Ted say now? This is the latest in a long line of Ted Kravitz things where he always puts his foot in his mouth. You remember him swearing on the broadcast last year when all Mohammed Ben Sulayem and the FIA and F1 fans could talk about with the downside ramifications of hearing drivers swearing at the press conference. He does have a habit, does Ted, of putting his foot in his mouth. And the reaction looks something like this. You can read this with me. Twitter just lost its mind. The fact that he's so comfortable telling it now kind of tells me that he doesn't think it's rude still. To be honest, I find those questions funny, but good to see you backed out of it, because Piastri might not have seen it the same way. Brit journalists are so rude to non-British drivers. That's quite mean. Glad he didn't ask it. He's quite weird, these questions to various drivers in the past. Thankfully, he didn't say this to Oscar's race because it would be quite effing stupid. But the fact that he can still talk about it publicly tells me he doesn't even regret thinking in that direct. Let me ask you guys this question. Open, non-rhetorical one. Are we snowflakes? Is this F1 wokeism to where we start reacting like this as if we've lost our minds, that Ted Kravitz very nearly asked Oscar Piastri a question? Now, I understand if we want to get a bit temperamental and sensitive about it. I get it. Oscar Piastri just had a very serious, what could have been a very serious incident, and you want to put a microphone in his face and ask him some controversial questions. It doesn't sit right. I understand it, but ultimately, why are we getting so outraged when Ted Kravitz said, you know what, I thought better of it. It wasn't a good idea because I think I would have ticked Oscar Piastri off. You guys have heard me say, who's that driver in car 81 and what has he done with Oscar Piastri? On the back of 3 races back-to-back, no podiums. On the back of the first 9 races where Oscar Piastri nailed himself 4 poles and 5 race wins, and the succeeding 10, he's nailed himself 1 pole and 2 race wins. We have to have ourselves a conversation about that drop-off in form, do we not? It being so material. It is the extent of it. Not kind. It's techier than techie things, this. And I think Ted Kravitz, to talk about it is one thing, eh? To talk about it is one thing. Does that warrant, though, the level of outrage that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen? Vish continues, even though I didn't F with Oscar, I am grateful he didn't say that. There were some pretty effed up people in the paddock with no sympathy at all. As much ish as Ted has done, he literally admits to stopping himself because he realised it was not very good to demonise. So it's weird. What the hell is wrong with that? Listen, I'm telling you, it gets techier than techie things. I don't know. I don't know whether we are Snowflake F1 reacting like this to Ted Kravitz not even asking a question when he could have, and maybe some might say should have, under the aegis of us now being entertainment as versus a sport. I don't know. It gets techier than techie things. I want to talk about Lewis Hamilton very quickly as we round third, because a lot's been said about Lewis's performance. 50 points adrift of Charles Leclerc season today, and that's significant. Though you offset that with this, the fact that he's still finding his feel, still acclimatising to the Fiorano and Maranello circumstance. But how long does he have? Because a gazillion people between this race weekend and last have said that Lewis Hamilton is struggling, that potentially he might want to retire. There is talk about Ferrari engineers being like, well, this Lewis Hamilton experiment is now officially failed. He's telling us what to do and how to build a car when he can't even drive it. That's what they're saying over at Maranello and Fiorano, notwithstanding the fact that Lewis is desperate to help. He just wants to fix their dodgy working culture. He wants to amend for their stop loss, which is too tight, too suffocating to enable and facilitate innovation as far as their technical, mechanical and aerodynamic departments. That's what Lewis wants to do desperately. However, Lewis has clapped back and he said, you know what, mate? Well, you need to understand that these things take time. Schumacher didn't win anything in his first couple of seasons with Scuderia Ferrari when he moved over in 96. 97 was fruitless. 98, 99, nothing doing. 99 and 98 were Mika Hakkinen years. Only in 2000, 4 years after Michael Schumacher moved over there to Scuderia Ferrari, did the Holy Trinity that was Jean Todt, Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn yield fruit in conjunction with Michael Schumacher? You guys tell me, has there ever been a stronger team to set their mind at winning F1 championships of the drivers and constructors variety? I would think not. Where is that as far as Lewis is concerned? What, you're going to tell me Frederick Vasseur can hold a candle to a Jean Todt or a Ross Brawn? Where is the Rory Byrne genius over at Scuderia Ferrari? What, Loic Serra? I do not think so. They should have signed Adrian Newey, is what they should have done, but they didn't. And now the one thing, the very thing that Lewis Hamilton needs but doesn't have is time. You already know. He has himself a 2+1, but potentially the chat coming out of Corriere della Sera and Gazzetta dello Sport is that Ferrari are considering not extending that contract, that Lewis stays another year in 2026 and then they plump for, I don't know, an Ollie Bearman, let's say, or a King George Russell of Kings Lynn Norfolk, who they quite fancy given his not insubstantial performance is season to date. It's going to get techie. I fear for Sir Lewis, notwithstanding him clapping back in an interview recently and saying Rome wasn't built in a day. I concur, Sir Lewis, but sadly, if it took Michael 4 years, I would argue that the hill up which Lewis would need to climb if he's to get to the mountaintop and win himself an 8th personally and his first for Scuderia Ferrari is probably steeper than anything that even Michael Schumacher had to climb, and that's saying something because he had a god-tier team around him in Byrne, Brawn and Todd. They do not have that now. There is no equivalent here, and so Lewis is going to have to do something different. This is unprecedented circumstances now, and then you still have Charles Leclerc in the other car. Going to get techier than techie things for Sir Lewis. I wish him the best. I extend him all the grace that he needs. It is a difficult circumstance. Ferrari, I mean, when Alain Prost goes there and Nigel Mansell goes there and Sebastian Vettel go there and Fernando Alonso go there, and none of them can bring championships to the red car with the yellow team and the black prancing horse atop. So Charles Edward, you're a legend. Happy Sunday, sir. What makes Sir Lewis think that this automotive pugilistic equation is any different to theirs? Oh, the humanity.